This is a journey into sound. A journey which along the way will bring to you new color, new dimension, new values, and a new experience.
Welcome to the G-Spot Podcast. I'm your guide, Katie Silcox, bringing you your weekly self-love soundbite. Join us for conversations around sex, spirit, and all things self-care. All things self-care. All things self-care.
This is a journey into sound.
Uno, dos, tres, cuatro.
You are a G-Spot Podcast with Katie Silcox.
Hey beauties, today's podcast, this very special podcast with my dear friend Alicia Fajardo, is brought to you by ApotheKary. Today I'm featuring their amazing recipe for a Pitta latte. In case you haven't noticed, it's hot out there, the heat has been building up, and this is a beautiful little thing you can whip up in your kitchen with a teaspoon of schizandra berry, half a teaspoon of hei shu wu, a teaspoon of maple syrup, a pinch of salt, and 8 ounces of plant-based milk like coconut milk would be great for this season. You're going to mix all those ingredients in the saucepan, heat them up, and you can also do this in the Vitamix. Just zip it up in the Vitamix. You'll get kind of a froth going. And what's great about this is the schizandra berry brings out your sweetness while loading you up with powerful antioxidants and minerals. And the hei shu wu, which is really fun to say, is an anti-aging tonic that boosts libido and is really great for your skin, eyes, and hair. It's also said to unlock the heart, which can help with the sometimes rigid or controlling nature of fire. Use this, guys. This sounds amazing. Check out the recipe for Pitta Latte on ApotheKary.co. We're going to put, as always, a link to this little recipe in the show notes. And we love ApotheKary. You can buy schizandra berry and hei shu wu on their website. So check out ApotheKary and let's get on to the show. So hey everybody, welcome to the G-Spot. I am excited because this is our first video podcast and we are here with Alicia Fajardo, who is someone that we've been excited to have on the podcast for a while. She is an incredible part of my life. She is one of my mentors. I've been working with her for several years, and she's amazing. She's a brilliant genius, which I'm sure she will not appreciate me saying, but I believe it. She's the founder of Transformation Studio in Portland. And she is the creator of her own signature method, the Fajardo method, which we're going to talk about today. It is a holistic biomechanics method, which teaches movement education and motor repatterning in conjunction with the nervous system. And so, hi, Alicia, welcome to the G-Spot Podcast.
Hi there.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about, well, first let me say, I've been working with Alicia for several years, and I came to Alicia because there was something going on with me whereby I was realizing that doing yoga wasn't making me calm and happy. And I had been doing yoga for 20 years and was the best yoga student, the best yoga practitioner. And there was just something inside of me that knew that something was off. And so I came to Alicia and I discovered that my body was moving in these particular patterns that were programmed into me all the time that may have been leading me into unconscious states of fight or flight. And so it was the first time I met with someone who was oh yeah, you're moving your body that way, or your bones are in a certain position, and that's why you're unconsciously in these states of fight or flight. And so it's been amazing to see how my system has slowly moved out of that state that yoga wasn't doing for me. And so I guess, Alicia, why don't you just share with our people who may have no idea what we're talking about, what is the Fajardo method in layman's terms?
in layman's terms, the Fajardo method of holistic biomechanics is just a method of looking at the body as a whole. And most systems say that they look at the body of the whole, but they actually don't look at how the brain uses the body and how the brain activates the body. They just look at the muscles, or they just look at the alignment, or they just look at the brain, but they don't look at how the brain creates movement and how the brain creates patterns, whether it's in a fight or flight state or a parasympathetic state. And so the Fajardo method just takes all of it, looks at everything together.
Yeah. So how did you, tell us a little bit about your background and your story? And I know that you have been in the dance world, Pilates world, exercise world. You worked with Nike. So tell us about how you came up with this method, I think as a result of having been, like myself, in these traditional exercise worlds.
Yeah, I started with dance, and then I ended up getting a degree in exercise physiology. And so I was in the fitness business. And even though in exercise physiology, we learn about the brain, we learn about the nervous system, then we learn about the muscles, and then we learn about the bones. Again, still everything wasn't put together. But in my years in the fitness industry, I was going through a Pilates certification, and I did a specific movement. And the movement is a big back bendy movement. And I dislocated my sacrum. And so my sacrum turned at a 90-degree angle in my body. And so it was interesting because my brain caused my sacrum to be dislocated in the movement that I did. And I tried every traditional way of trying to get it back into place. I did massage, I did chiropractic, I did acupuncture. I started to train in gyrotonic and Alexander technique and all of these other systems. And they would get it back into place for a moment, temporarily. But then my brain was always making the decision to dislocate it again. And when I started to look at, okay, I'm going to have to figure this out for myself, how to get my sacrum back into place. And it's obviously my brain thinks that my sacrum needs to be in this place for a functional reason. So I had to determine, well, why does my brain feel that this is more functional for it to be dislocated than for it not to be dislocated? And so I started to study the brain and the nervous system, and started to look at all of the different types of patterning that the fight or flight nervous system created and that the parasympathetic nervous system created. And by doing that, and by just starting to incorporate everything that I knew about fascia, alignment, muscles, everything that I knew about all the subjects that I had studied into that mode, my sacrum relocated itself, and I never had a problem since.
So basically what you're saying, so for everyone listening, is our brain, right? Your brain was choosing to put your sacrum in a place that would keep it in a fight or flight state because in that moment it was not receiving adequate information about what was actually occurring. And so it was keeping you in that fight or flight space in like a protection way. Is that kind of what was going on?
Exactly. It was. I was in a really stressful job, and all my brain wanted to do unconsciously was wanting to flee to get out of the job, because every day I was threatened to be fired. And so my brain wanted to flee from the job. And so it had shifted my sacrum into that flee mode to get me ready to go. And it was interesting because, again, in the process of starting to give my brain more information, I also had to give my emotional mind more information about leaving the job. Right. And so once I did leave the job, and then my brain had a lot more information about where my body was at in space and how it was in a safe place, then it started to relocate my sacrum.
So for those people who are listening, like our body, like if we're in these states of pain, or in your case, like our body moving our sacrum to a different place. Like I know so many people out there listening are going to be like, oh my God, like I've had this pain. I've been doing yoga. I've been doing Pilates. I've been doing massage, and it's still coming back. And I think one of the like seminal aspects of your method that I've learned, obviously, and incorporated into what I do, which is more traditional Ayurveda, yoga, is there's something so special about paying attention to our structure, which is, in this case, our bones. And so there's something about that. And I would love for you to speak to like, what is so special about paying attention to our bones that trains our brain to come out of these fight or flight states?
Your brain has a system that's a mapping system, and it uses these cells that are called place cells and grid cells to know where everything is in the body in relationship to each other, as well as to know where the body is in relationship to the things in its external environment. And your bones are structural landmarks that your brain has a map of. And if the map is inefficient or slightly off, your brain always errs on the side of caution. And if it doesn't know exactly where one bone is in relationship to the other, it wants to always be prepared for any event that might come. And so it triggers the fight or flight nervous system. But if your brain starts to pay attention to where the bones are and it starts to update its brain map and make the brain map more accurate and more efficient, then it doesn't feel the need to be unnaturally prepared. And so then it can start to sense where exactly the body is in relationships to its environment. And it will always be able to assess if it's safe or if it's not safe.
Yeah. This is like the huge Alicia Fajardo, like, aha discovery, because when that blew my mind. Like, if my brain understands where I am, it's not going to tend to that. We describe it as the anxiety place or the depression place, which you've described to me as like that fight, flight, flee, or collapse, right? Like I'm just gonna hold still and not move because that's gonna hide me and make me safer, or I'm just gonna fight, or I'm just gonna run away. When we've worked together, and what's been super cool is to see the way that you've created this thing, you've discovered this thing, and I'm seeing how, oh my God, like this woman in Portland, Oregon has literally given scientific language to what I think that the original tantric yogis, who were not the ascetic yogis in the caves, like the ones that were studying Ayurveda, studying plants, studying medicine, they were coming up with these same things that were saying, we want to go in the direction of the life force that doesn't need to be controlled, that doesn't need to be harnessed, and that doesn't need to like control their breath, control their body, put their body into these alignment patterns, which are so common in yoga. Like, even if you go into any modern yoga class, the first thing that you're going to be told to do is breathe in evenly, count it out if you need to, breathe out the same amount. And I was one of those teachers, like saying, like, count your breath, in for 6, out for 6. Now put your shoulder blades here, and now put your thigh bone here and your knee bone here. And like, I met you and I was like, oh my gosh, she has given scientific language to this underlying geometry that the original tantric yogis saw. And so they talked about it as yantras and geometric forms. And so the first thing you had me do when I met you was to pay attention to, I'll never forget it, you had me pay attention to my mastoid bones in relationship to, you said you can either choose the floor as a second point, or you can choose your shoulders. And I did what she said. And I was like, what am I doing? This is not going to heal me, right? And my bones, my mastoid bones started to move out of where they were, which was like down in my jaw, up and back. And you're like, oh yeah, like, you know, it takes about 90 seconds for your brain to map where those bones are. And lo and behold, the bones move. So I guess I want everybody to know, like, the simplicity and elegance of your method, but also like how much you're really embodying what these ancient, true, I think, seekers who wanted to go in the direction of life, not against it, who wanted to go with life, not death, were seeing. But what was so magical to me is this idea of 2 points, because that's what the original tantric said. Like, you have this thing called the bindu, the first point, and it needs a second point. So will you speak to why it's so important that we just pay attention to 2 points in our body, if it is important?
It is important. The brain, again, maps everything in relationship to something else. And so if I just pay attention to one area of my body, the brain can't map it in relationship to something else. And so therefore, it can't relate that to the rest of its environment. And so it can't determine that the rest of the environment is safe. And so it's only when it has the 2 points that the brain starts to see where one thing is in relationship to another. If you're looking at a map, for instance, and you know that you have to, here's Google Maps and here's your starting point, it always gives you your starting point and it always wants to know your destination. You can't not put in the second point and then have Google Maps guide you to somewhere. You always have to have the second point. Your brain is exactly the same way. So your brain has to have the 2 points so that it can guide the rest of your body to a location. And most people aren't aware that all the bones in the body move constantly and move all of the time. And so whether in fight or flight, they move to certain locations, and whether in parasympathetic, they move to other locations. And so your brain can't know where to move your bones to if it doesn't have those 2 points of reference.
Well, and where my brain goes to it is I'm a student of Tantra, and there's like the divine feminine, and the divine feminine is the natural life force that knows what to do without us trying. And when we talk about these 2 points, it's all about relationship. And so I was raised in a tradition that was a little bit more masculine, and you would pay attention to 1 point. Hold your awareness on 1 point, 1 point, one pointed focus, one pointed mind. And what I love about what I've learned with you and the way it's just like was everything that I was already doing myself in my heart. It's like, no, it's about relationship. It's about my bone, to another bone, that relationship, but also my bone to the wall in front of me, my experience in relationship. And in that relationship, my natural physiology is able to map itself and to put myself into the right place. Whereas before, it's like self-referential. It's like, no, 1 point, only you, only you. And when we only focus on ourselves, it creates this kind of spiraling inward endlessly. And we heal in relationship, which is, it's very interesting that we're all focused on ourselves. And actually our attachment is about other people, and our healing comes from relating to if we're just talking about our own body, one bone to another, right? Like, I really want everybody to know about this amazing, simple, elegant, what I've tried to do is just continue to synthesize what you do, because it's so brilliant. It's so vast. There's so much science behind it. There's so much anatomy. But what I've essentially synthesized from working with you for 2 years is, and please correct me and elaborate on this, like when the body's in fight or flight, it has this tendency to contract and constrict everything to the midline and hug everything to the midline and move things along this sort of tuck in and out plane. Whereas when the body is in a more like fluid, parasympathetic, as you call it, place where you're not in fight or flight, it tends to move everything along this, what I think of like the plane of the butterfly wings, like the transverse plane, where we're moving kind of like a more of a dancer. So the structure moves to like the outside so that the organs have room to function. So can you take everything I just said and say it in the correct way and explain that so that people could leave this one podcast being like, oh my God, like thinking about how the basic structure moves in fight or flight versus parasympathetic.
In fight or flight, everything, as you said, does get pulled towards the center, whether it's from the sides, it gets pulled towards the midline, or from top to bottom, it gets pulled towards the midline. And it does that to create a protective situation for the organs and to change how blood flows and to change neurology and how the nerves send signals. Your body dehydrates the fascia, and so all the bones get closer together, the joint space decreases. And it does that because force, how I create force, is mass times acceleration. And so it decreases the joint space, so all the joints rub against one another. So I have more surfaces of acceleration to create force with. But in doing so, the joint spaces, as they get closer together, the bones start to rub, so it causes an erosion. It also causes all of the things that are in the joint capsule normally, like fluid, nerves, blood vessels, hormone travel. It causes that to stop and decline because it knows that it wants to be able to use all the blood flow in the arms and the legs in order to go forth, punch, flee. When it gets exhausted from that, though, it wants to conserve energy, so it doesn't want to waste that effort of the blood traveling to and from the heart at a great degree. It brings all the organs together, so the blood doesn't have to go very far just to get to the organ cavity. But the leverage does come from the spine in fight or flight, and so the spine starts to push forward and back, which does start to, as you said, it starts to tip everything in a forward and back motion. But if I think about that again from a functional fight or flight perspective, as it tips forward, it loads one side of the joint, and as it tips back, it loads the other side of the joint. So regardless of how I'm moving, there's always that friction against the joints so that I can always accelerate, get away if I need to. And so in fight or flight, it's a very compressive movement. So everything starts to compress together. It's a very protective movement. So I can open all my joints and stretch away from the midline. Everything gets very tight to the midline. In parasympathetic, the goal is the opposite.
Hi there, this is Amaury, Program Manager at Shakti School with a quick update. If you love this podcast and learning about Ayurveda, health, yoga, psychology, and everything in between, we have two really special offerings right now that are free. The first is our mini course on Divine Feminine Ayurveda. This is actually a special sneak peek into Ayurveda school. It's 4 hours worth of video and an accompanying workbook. If you're looking for inspiration or just curious about Katie's approach to Ayurveda, I highly recommend this offering. You can sign up for it by going to bit.ly/Ayurveda mini course. That's bit.ly/Ayurveda mini course. And I'm going to put the link to that in the show notes for you. The second offering is a free 30-day trial of our subscription platform, The Lineage of Love. Every month in The Lineage of Love, you get a new seasonally attuned video and audio workshop with Katie. The workshops are a mix of movement, yoga, meditation, Ayurveda, and all the other stuff we love to talk about. The link to register for the free trial is bit.ly/lineage-of-love-free-trial. So I'll definitely put a link to that one in the show notes too. Now, if you know you're ready to go deep and spend a year learning with us, the next session of Ayurveda School starts in January, and the deadline for registration is December 31st. Getting back into the swing of learning can be a big commitment, but it's also the best catalyst for change and evolution. If Katie and I could have every woman do at least level 1 of Ayurveda School, we would. It's a year-long program that will both nurture and challenge you in the best way. It's everything we should have learned as beings with bodies and psyches that we were never taught in school. If you want to have a chat with me about whether this program is right for you, you can put a free call directly on my calendar at calendly.com/Shakti School/free coaching call. That's calendly.com/Shakti School/free coaching call. And will also put that link in the show notes. Have a beautiful day, sisters. Now back to the episode.
To take it back to where we were. So this tipping action, especially when we're talking about the pelvis, this tipping action in states of fight or flight, which are meant to be fast, not last long. Once you discover you're okay, you would never go back to that type of movement. That tipping action serves a purpose, right?
It does.
Get you out quickly, punch, defense, etc. So, I mean, but continue and finish your thought on parasympathetic, and then let's take it to where I'm going to go with like the modern movement of exercise and yoga in this world.
With the parasympathetic, the point of the parasympathetic is to really, again, relate to your external environment and relate to it in the most open way possible. So take in the most sensory information, gather. If I'm outside, I can hear the birds, I can see the grass, I can sense all the smells that are outside, I can feel the wind on my face. It's to take in as much information as possible. And to do that, all the nerves that travel through all the spaces in your body have to have a really open channel so that information can get from the limbs all the way to the brain at the quickest pace possible. And so in parasympathetic, all the joint structures do separate. So there's spaces between every joint that we have. It all moves towards the outside of the body so that the organs have lots of room. All the blood vessels that provide fluid flow have lots of room to allow the blood to flow from top to bottom in the body. All the things that carry hormones have lots of room to allow those hormones to flow from top to bottom. And again, it does move in this forward and back kind of transverse plane, which is like you described the butterfly wings. And it does that so that there's never any loading on any of the joint, right? If I'm running and my body is moving in this way, when my foot hits the ground, there's no downward force that's applied to the ground. And so I don't compress and compact my joint. Whereas if I do this when I'm running, there's, again, compacting force on one side of the joint, and then it's on the opposite side of the joint.
Tilting the pelvis up, like, for those that are listening, she's making the hand motion of you tucking your tailbone down and drawing your belly in.
Yes. So some people call it anterior tilt or posterior tilt of the pelvis as well, like if you're taking anatomy or alignment classes. But that type of movement is what creates all of that compacting force, which in fight or flight serves a really good purpose.
So this explains how someone can be sitting at their desk and have these horrific back issues and back pain, and they haven't done anything necessarily harmful to themselves, but they could be in a job that they hate and in fight or flight, flight. And like you were saying, the body's like constantly trying to flee. And so this can explain some of the reason why people have back pain is like one of the biggest issues that people have today. And I read this book by Dr. John Sarno that was talking about back pain as especially men, but women as well, get this back pain. And he correlated it to growing up, my grandfather got ulcers, and that there was this epidemic of ulcers amongst men in our country in the 1950s and 60s. And it's that and then they discovered that ulcers were X, Y, and Z. And so the brain got the information that ulcers were actually emotional. And so it would no longer function. And so now the brain's like taking it to the back pain. But I want to go back to what you were saying about the structure of fight or flight versus parasympathetic. So what blew my mind when you taught me about this, Alicia, was the correlations between the fight or flight structural patterns and the alignment cues that I received in traditional yoga. You are taught to, hug the bones to the midline, hug the muscle to the bone, and hug the bones to the midline. Draw the belly in, and now no one says tuck your pelvis because they got the memo, but people are still saying, draw the tailbone down towards the earth. The bandhas in yoga are all about Uddiyana Bandha, draw your belly in. Mula Bandha, lift your perineum up into your body. Jalandhar Bandha, tuck your chin. And when when I told you about this, you were like, oh yeah, those bandhas are exactly what your body does in these advanced stages of fight, flight, but moreover collapse, where you're freezing and you're dead. And so what the heck is going on? And it's not just to throw a bomb at yoga. We're not mad at yoga, but it's also Pilates. It's also exercise, dance. It's everywhere. Why are all of these movement forms telling us to take our body into a fight or flight state almost intentionally?
A lot of it has to do with the person who is leading the movement, right? There's a lot of, in movement, there's a lot of control. And when a person is leading movement, there's a lot of perceived control. In yoga, probably for different reasons than where I come from in fitness and Pilates per se, but in Pilates and fitness forms, a lot of the control was to erase liability. Okay. And to deal with legality issues. And so if I tell you exactly how to do it, and I tell you what is medically approved, then if something happens to you, it's your fault. And so I'm not responsible. So in the fitness industry, there's been a lot of, and in Pilates itself, there's been a lot of, we're going to tell you exactly how to do it. And so if you do something different, or you don't do it exactly as I perceive that it should be done, then it's just, then it's just your fault. So you can't come back to me and say that, it's my fault that I taught you something incorrect, because I can always say, well, you just didn't do it like I asked you to do it.
And I think it also is reflective of like a bigger pattern in our society of like wanting to control the body.
Exactly. And if we control the body, then supposedly that gets rid of the fear of the unknown about the body. And it makes us feel more secure. It makes us feel more in charge. When in reality, the more we control the body, the more the body triggers the fight or flight nervous system, because the conscious brain is just tiny. It's 15%. And we have 85% of this big, huge part of the brain that controls the body. And as we consciously control the body, the brain, unconscious brain, doesn't know any functional reason why our conscious brain would be taking over that role, unless there was something really wrong with the unconscious brain. And so it triggers that fight or flight nervous system just to be ready, just in case something's happening.
So I want to repeat that, everybody. When we control the body is going to go, oh my God, why is this person trying to control me? It must mean that something really bad's about to happen. I'm going to prepare by going into fight or flight, because an animal would never try to control its physiology ever, right? Unless something
exactly
bad.
And it wouldn't even still at that point, it would allow its unconscious nervous system to dictate what it needs to do to solve the problem or to deal with its environment.
One of the things that you and I have discussed in our private sessions together that I'm sure is going to really be a strong thing to hear for people who are our listeners, who are many yogis and yoga teachers and body workers and holistic health people. And that is this idea that controlology, which you told me was the original name of Pilates. And again, Alicia and I are both on the same page, and I hope everyone gets this loud and clear. This is not about calling out any type of movement form. This isn't about any movement form being wrong or bad. There's nothing wrong. I want everyone to hear this. There's nothing wrong with doing Pilates. There's nothing wrong with doing yoga. There's nothing wrong with going to the gym and working out. It's not about that. It's about that control. And so we can do what I've learned with Alicia. We can do any movement form that we want, as long as we are paying attention to our structure and letting that mind fluidly move throughout the body, rather than imposing a certain alignment cues upon the body. And I know that the listeners out there are going to be like, oh my God, I've done a 500-hour yoga teacher training. I've been a yoga teacher for 2 years, 10 years, 20 years. Does this mean everything that I learned was wrong? And I also know that people are going to ask, because they ask me this, does this mean that you don't need any alignment, and that won't my students start to get hurt if I don't give them alignment cues? And so, Alicia has created her holistic biomechanics. Like, it's not that we don't want to be aware of the body. And so can you speak to that? Because I know that question is going to come up.
It's giving the brain information again, so that the brain can decide how that body in that moment should respond. And so as a teacher of movement, I can give an individual 2 points of reference to just be aware of, and I can give them ideas about how those 2 points might relate. Are they closer together? Are they farther apart? Is one higher than the other? Is one more to the right? Is one more to the left? And I can start to give information that way to a person, so that they start to look and discover how those 2 points relate to one another. And in doing that, during all the movements that they do, their brain will take their body to where it can be at the moment. And every single human being's body won't ever be in the same place. And so much of it depends on how hydrated is the fascia. Is the fascia able to slide as well in one person as another? Is the valve system pumping in a certain area, because certain valves may be more active than the other, which allows more of that transverse plane of motion. And so also in the body, one joint can only be open as every other single joint in the body. And so a lot of times in our cueing, we're cueing, oh, the shoulder girdle, really open this here, stretch this here, but we're not seeing that the rest of the body isn't ready to go there.
Right.
And so we may over open in a place, which creates more tendency to injury because we're taking an area beyond its biomechanical range of motion. And we're doing that because we aren't recognizing the rest of the body has to go with it. And so it's more just provide that information of those 2 points, start to give people information about, oh, the reference, it could be higher or lower, it could be more to the right or to the left, and allow them to keep noticing. And as they notice, their whole body will change as it can at the moment. And it's not going to be the same every moment.
I think this is amazing. And like I said, going back to like, you are giving such practical technique and science to what I am like, my heart and my whole intuition has been sensing for years now, which is this, what I call the divine feminine, which is just a language around saying the animal that is your body is way smarter than this prefrontal cortex 15% decision maker, which thinks that it's in charge. Like, the body actually has this incredible wisdom that knows where to put you and knows what state to be in. And it's really like celebrating that life force and honoring that. And like, you don't have to do it formally. It's just paying attention, right? And letting it flow. And it's all about life. And so what I've learned more with you, but what I already was sensing and intuiting and kind of rebelling against in the modern yoga world, because as you know, Alicia, and as many of our listeners know, you know, I was on the cover of the Yoga Journal, right? There was no greater poster girl for yoga than Katie Silcox. And yet, you know, underneath that surface, like, my system was out of whack, doing yoga, like really committed to it, and supposedly living this yogic lifestyle. And what I discovered through working with you was a language around maybe the why of why yoga and the way that I was doing it, controlology, right, wasn't working. And it made me really look at the history of yoga. And when I did that, and I read an amazing book called The Science of Yoga by William J. Broad, which if anyone hasn't read, it's really important for us to know what we're doing, right? We have millions of women doing yoga, primarily taught either by men or lineages from men, based in India, coming from a system that was largely a lineage of male ascetic yogis going off into the caves and into the forest to essentially and intentionally, by their own admission, they were very, very smart people, shut down their nervous system, shut down their sensory system. There's a word for it, right? Like, you literally shut down your sensing system. That's the intention, to turn off the system, to turn off the senses rather, so as to collapse the system, so as to enter into the so-called state of bliss, which, through working with you and learning about the nervous system, that state of bliss is a natural physiological state that happens to every animal, including humans, at the moment when they're about to die. It's the way that nature takes care of us. Right before we're about to die, we feel no pain. We feel at one with everything. And so I realized, oh my God, I've been doing this system that was intentionally set up to take me towards death. And then I wonder, why is my digestion so shitty? Why am I feeling afraid? Why am I not, like, why is my physiology functioning worse? If I'm doing all this yoga and breath work and deep inner meditation, why am I getting worse physically? And it was because I was actually denying life and moving towards death. I even remember all of these tantric poems about that masculine form, and we don't want to say male but it was primarily men, was designed to teach you literally how to die well. Whereas Ayurveda is like, I want to teach you how to live well. So I'm just interested if you want to say anything about that controlology in relationship to yoga.
Again, just like you mentioned, where yoga came from, we as a population were different, right? Our goals are different. What we want out of our life is different. And we aren't realizing that the goal of that yoga, right, and the forms of yoga that came from those men, right, the goal was to get closer to death. That was the goal. And so if that's not my personal goal, then why would I follow the ritual practices that create leading me towards that goal? Right. And so it just makes no sense. If that is your goal, then go for it. Go 100% in that direction. But if that isn't your goal, if your goal is that you want to be more full of life, if you want to be able to move, if you want to feel like your body can function and it can jump anytime it wants to, right? And it can lift the groceries. If you want to do all of those things, you just have to follow the practice that's going to lead you towards that.
If you want to raise your children and have good fertility and have good digestion and work and create things in the world, if you want to be alive, right? And I want to just make the point, because I can already hear people thinking out there. We are not talking about every single form of yoga, but what we are talking about is this traditional form that was passed down, was often passed down by ascetic yogis, again, we want to honor that. Like, if you want to be a monk and you want to go live in the cave or the monastery, and your goal, if that was your goal, which it was their goal, that's great. Like, we're not saying good or bad. I don't want anyone out there thinking, oh, we're saying good or bad. No, we're saying there were other systems that were more designed towards life. Unfortunately, a lot of those systems didn't get codified and they didn't get written down, and they were largely carried on by, women out in the, herbs and plants and making, working with children. Like, these feminine forms didn't get codified as much as the more dramatic and drastic masculine forms. The other thing that was interesting is that yoga in the modern context is incredibly new. It was invented, in the early, I can't remember the exact dates, but the modern form of yoga is actually really new and was developed based on Indian martial arts and British military calisthenics. And so if we think about who this modern form that we're all doing, right, this yoga form that most modern Americans and Westerners are doing, it came from the British Army and Indian martial arts, kind of mixed in with this mysticism from thousands of years ago about shutting the valve system and the nervous system down. When you mix those two together, so shutting down the central nervous system and the sensing system, and British military, right, martial arts and British military, what the military is attempting to do with those forms is to get everybody in line and controlled and to shut down their sensing system. Because if a military guy is like super aware of all of his emotions and senses, he's not going to be able to walk into battle, right, and fight. So I'm just so fascinated by this origin point for these movements, because it's literally the opposite of what is a common yoga practitioner. A woman who is probably in her 20s, 30s, 40s, who wants to be alive and fertile, and we're shutting that down. So, anything you want to speak to on that, controlology?
And too, something about the movements, because the movements of yoga are found in every other physical system, right? They're found in the similar movements of how you move the spine, how you move the hips, how you move the shoulder girdle is found in calisthenics all over the place, right? It's found in all types of movements. If you watch animals in the water, they do those movements. I mean, those are just natural movements,
right?
But it's how we then have been instructed to do them. And the instructions on how to do the movement is coming from that reference point, right? That you just mentioned. It's coming from that historical reference point.
Everybody, and so that's the most important thing we're saying. It is not the movements, it's how we do the movements and that control around the movements. So go ahead.
Exactly. And as practitioners, right, most people who are practitioners, they are going to take a class and they're making the assumption, right, that the person who they're taking the class from knows why they're teaching these cues. They know exactly what it's all about. They have all this physiological reference point. And so, right, they're making the assumption that people know, and I know just coming from the fitness industry and from the Pilates industry, that all the certifications don't teach you anything about any of this, right? It's just, here's the choreography, here's the actual shape that your body's supposed to be in, teach it, and here are the cues, but they don't actually teach the teacher to be an observer of themselves, of the person who's doing the movement. And so a lot of it as a practitioner is we need to know and do a little bit more research about, okay, where is this person who's teaching us coming from? And we need to understand that if they're teaching us from a point of, they may not even know where they're coming from. They may just be teaching us from I did a 3-day spinning certification and that's where I'm coming from. And so instead of putting our trust and the care of our body in their hands, we need to be a little bit more responsible and start to care for our body ourselves.
Right. I think this is so big. I think most yoga teachers in America have no clue, right? We're just parroting back. We're just parroting back that choreography that I called it the script, right? And the script is what my teacher taught me. And we have this deep trust. And where did that come from? And where did that come from? And that's really the research I did over the past 2 years. Like, what is the actual lineage of where this language of choreography comes from? And it was so enlightening. It was like, oh, there's nothing bad necessarily or wrong going here. Although I do have a little bit of a conspiracy brain. And sometimes I think it's very interesting that we have all of this lineage of men controlling women's bodies and shutting down these bodies and making them more collapsed. And in that collapsed nervous system state, I am very highly susceptible to brainwashing, right? And so now on top of having my nervous system shut down, on top of having my sensing system shut down, which is going to give me those natural cues to like what is actually happening, I've shut all that down. Right. And now my brain is in this perfect place to be told what to do and told who I am and told how to be. And, so from a little bit more of a dramatic place, like we are making ourselves a little bit more controllable. And I think that, just in conclusion around all of this, there's nothing wrong. And I don't think most yoga teachers have any clue about this. I think most people are benevolent and wanting to do good for the world and have the wonderfulest of intentions. I think it's just that we're not aware.
Exactly. Definitely. Yeah. It's just, we don't have that basic knowledge, right, about how the body works, how the body is the great operator of the system. So our brain, our conscious brain, our mind doesn't have to be the operator of the system.
So for all of our beautiful listeners out there, they're going to go out after they listen to this podcast. They're going to take a yoga class, a Pilates class. They're going to exercise. We're movement-based people here at the Gi Spot. I want them to walk away from this podcast knowing that they don't need to be afraid of any form of movement. As long as what? Fill in the blank, Alicia Fajardo.
As long as you start to bring your conscious awareness to the 2 points of reference, and we can pick anything. You can pick the tongue and the roof of your mouth. You can pick anything, but just put your conscious awareness on 2 points of reference. If you are aware of your bones, pick a bony structure. Those are the easiest for your brain to latch onto. And just as you're going through your practice, whatever movement it is, whatever the teacher is saying, rather than doing the cue that they're instructing you to do, because that may or may not be appropriate for you at that moment in time.
Right.
Just sense your 2 points and keep moving through the movements of the activity and sense those 2 points and allow your unconscious brain to dictate how your body should be. And that may mean that yesterday you twisted when you twisted 45 degrees around. That may mean that today you only twist 20 degrees, right? Or it may mean that yesterday you twisted 10 degrees around and today you can twist 45, but it will change something. And that's one of the things that might be challenging too. A lot of times our ego comes into the practice of activity and exercise. And so to be able to just go, okay, today my body's only going here. If I sense the 2 points, I'm going to stay within that framework versus try and push it to go further, which sometimes we get in a class setting and our ego wants to take us to the place that everybody else is going. Right. And so a lot of it is, okay, now that I'm sensing these 2 points and I'm allowing my unconscious mind to dictate how my body is, I have to be able to accept graciously whatever plan that is for today. And sometimes that may not fit in with how the ego wants to be seen in a group setting.
Right. Yeah. It's so simple. It's just pay attention to 2 points in your body. The bones are a really good place to start. And to continue to just maintain your awareness there, noticing how your body changes, noticing those shifts and changes, more bottom up rather than top down approach. I know that you've helped hundreds, if not thousands of people get out of pain. I know that you've helped a lot of people, including myself, move out of states of collapse, fight, flight. There's so much more that Alicia could share. And what's really exciting is that we're actually having Alicia come and be a part of my next training called Rasa, which is about, Rasa means sap, juice, the valve system, the lymph. We want all those fluids moving. And so what better person to have as a guest teacher than Alicia? And so we actually found a bigger space in Charlottesville. We were sold out, and now we can take about 10 or 15 more people. So Alicia's coming the first weekend in November. It's going to be our big Rasa training. Lots of incredible people are going to be there. And what I'm really excited about is Alicia sharing her perspective on the emotions. And we didn't even go there, right? But how the emotions are related to these different fight flight patterns, and how we can work with our body in a way that's going to help us have more emotional congruency with what's actually real, rather than the stored emotions that we're all walking around with. And so if you guys out there listening are like, oh my God, I feel like I just like want to know so much more about this person and her work, we're going to provide a link for her website, transformationspdx.com, in our show notes. And Alicia's out in Portland, and she offers lots of trainings. And you know, I know you're going to get flooded with people who want to work with you and your team one-on-one, which is something that they do. And I cannot recommend her enough. We hope that you guys will come out and meet with her in person and me together, which is going to be really fun, in Charlottesville, first weekend of November. Alicia, I'm so excited that you are our first podcast guest. You're one of my favorite people, and it just makes me so happy to be able to present you to all my ladies and guys out there listening, mostly ladies, let's be honest. If there was one thing that you could leave me with and our listeners with as a way they can balance their nervous system today, what would that one thing like be?
I would just, and you have practiced this, just start to actually observe like how your body is in relationship to your environment. So for instance, when you pick up your coffee cup, actually notice how your hand is holding the cup, and actually notice what's the texture of the cup. What do your fingers feel? What do they actually sense? When you're driving, notice how you're holding onto the steering wheel. Notice, like if you notice the gas pedal, notice, does the gas pedal have ridges? Can your foot pick that up? Just start to notice your environment. Notice you in your environment, and actually pay attention, versus, you know, so much of it is we're so much in our conscious mind that we don't ever pay attention. You know, we're walking on the ground and we don't notice that we're walking on rocks, or that we're walking on concrete, or we're walking on dirt. We just kind of assume that take it for granted, versus start to actually pay attention.
Beautiful parting words. And by the way, in case anyone isn't aware of this by now, essentially what Alicia's saying and what I'm saying to you guys is, this is what enlightenment is. It's just being here now in this moment, but not from a place of dying to the world, but actually moving into it through this precious gateway of our five senses. And I know there are many more senses you're going to learn about with Alicia, but through these primary gateways. So Alicia, thank you so much for taking time. By the way, it's like 6:49 in the morning for her. And we hope to have you again on the podcast. And I know everybody's going to want to come out and meet you. And yeah, thank you so much for being in my life.
You're welcome. I am looking forward to being there.
All right, everybody, you can learn more about Alicia at Transformations PDX, and we'll obviously put a link to her website in the show notes. And thank you guys so much for joining us. Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you.
Put
ফুটে ফুল আপন সুখে ফুটে ফুল